at Wild Birds Unlimited in Lake Forest Park. And thank you to all of you for joining us again this evening for our latest adventure on Facebook Live. Tonight, our topic is the orchard mason bee, which is a native super pollinator bee here in the Pacific Northwest. We're going to talk all about that tonight and then follow up as usual with our question and answer period. So we have a space of time right now while we're waiting for people to log on. And what I'd like to do for that bit of time is go back to our last session and talk about the nesting season. We talked about that in February, and now it really is upon us. Show you a couple of examples of some really cute nesting boxes. We've got a great selection right now. This particular one is especially good for chickadees. So if you haven't bought a nesting box yet, it's not too late to put one up. The birds are looking for possibilities right now. This is actually a good time to put one up. And this particular one has the correct size hole and depth for a chickadee. This is a good one, has easy clean out, and they would be attracted to this. We also have several different ones that are great for wrens. You might remember from our discussion last month that wrens like a more shallow nesting box. So this has the correct size hole and the right depth for a little wren. This one can hang, but we have post mounted as well. So again, it's time to put them up. If you don't have a nesting box yet, come on into the shop. We've got a great selection. Also, I wanted to point out that we've got some really helpful books and guides about the nesting season. If you ever come upon a nest in your yard, perhaps just a cup nest in a shrub or a tree, this really fascinating book, it's called Bird Nests, and it has actual pictures of different kinds of nests that birds build. So like a robin's nest or warblers, different kinds of nests, so that you can learn to identify that nest that you've come upon. Guide is really fun. It's about nest, but eggs. It shows photographs of different eggs that birds lay. So it's another learning tool that you can learn more about the nesting season by the egg that's in that nest. Who might have laid that egg? So this is really a fun one too. Also, be aware that we do have our nesting blend. Super nesting blend is available now here in the shop, and this particular blend provides certain types of nutrition for birds during the nesting season. It's very high in calcium, and this is super helpful for the females forming eggs, and to lay healthy, strong eggs. Calcium, that's an important part of their diet, plus protein. So the nesting blend is really a nice addition to your yard this time of year, and for the next several months, actually, many of our species lay multiple broods through the early spring and into summer. So the nesting blend is a great one to have on hand. All right, so now I wanted to mention as well, I'm sure many of you will have questions about pine siskins, because that's sort of been the big topic for the last several months. So I am going to bring that up right at the very end of the show. Today we want to focus on the mason bees, and so at the end of the program I will talk a little bit about the pine siskins, and I'm sure you'll have some questions, and that's top of mind right now for all of us here in Western Washington. It's a big topic. So all right, now, so we are getting folks logged on, and I need to tell you that Molly, as usual, is my counterpart. There she is behind the camera. Hello, Molly. She makes all of this click. Without her, I'm not here. So Molly is the other part of the team here in Lake Forest Park. So she's watching the laptop and checking to see if folks are logging on, and will let me know when it looks like we have a nice list. Oh, and she says, yes, we do. So great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight for our topic, mason bees, the orchard mason bee. So I'll just jump right in. Mason bees are a native pollinator. And they are found particularly in the western North America, including Canada. They're not found in the real dry desert areas, but you will find different species in the more eastern part of the United States. Okay, so the thing that's cool about them is they actually pollinate more than honeybees. We all think about honeybees as being the busy pollinators buzzing around our yards, but the orchard mason bee actually pollinates many more times than the honeybee does. They're much more efficient and more effective, and they're an early spring bee, so they emerge depending depending on our weather, really. It could be late February, but more often around here it's maybe even as late as mid-March. It's when we've had several days, 4 or 5 days consecutively of 55 degrees as the warmest part of the day. That's when the mason bee will begin to emerge. They want to be warm. And so the male needs to come out of the little house and get out into nature and start feeding on nectar and pollen and growing and preparing to be ready for the female. The female will emerge a couple weeks later, and then they will mate. The male and female will mate, and within about 3 weeks for the male, after he's been alive for about 3 weeks, that's the end of his life. Only lives for about 3 weeks. So it's different than when we think of seeing bees buzzing around our yard all summer long. The mason bee is very definitely about spring. So that male does his part. After the female and male mate, then after, he's gone. He's done his bit. Then the female gets busy, and she is a big, important part of how things work. She will begin going from tree to plant to shrub, all around different flowers, collecting pollen and nectar, and this is how they pollinate our yards. They're extraordinarily good for fruit trees because, as you know, fruit trees are blossoming in the spring. And so that's perfect timing for the orchard mason bee. They will fly around and pollinate all these, your apple or cherry or whatever fruit tree you have, and help for a higher crop production. They're especially beneficial for fruit trees. They also will go to different flowers and shrubs looking for nectar and collecting that pollen. There's a real common landscaping shrub that a lot of folks have. You may not even know it, but it's really commonly found in yards. And it's a delightful shrub for us because it's beautiful and it has it's very fragrant. And the little blossoms that kind of hang down from its stem look like little tiny lily of the valley. It's Peri japonica. And mason bees love that shrub. If you have one of them, their timing is great because it's blooming when they emerge in the spring. So that's a good shrub to have in your yard. If you don't have one, it takes a while for maturity, but it's a wonderful landscaping shrub. All right, so the female, once she has started collecting her pollen, she is going to go back to these houses that you may have put up. In nature, if there was no little mason bee house, they would find little cavities and tunnels and small spaces to nest as they would naturally in nature. But we have found that we can provide something for them to help the mason bee. And this is a good thing because you've probably heard or read all about the honeybee in North America they've been in steep decline. Colony collapse, you may have heard that phrase. A lot of it has to do with mites and also pesticide use in the United States. So honeybees are having a heck of a time. Scientists are studying that and trying to do what we can to help. But in the meantime, here's our little native pollinator just buzzing around doing its natural thing. So you can help. These are different houses that we sell, and there's different kinds of options to choose. If you come into the shop, we can explain them in depth and show you you know, the different types, different styles. Some are more, some are super easy, a beginner type. We have everything. So this is an example. Here is a shelter that protects the tubes that are inside. And this is where the female goes back to these tubes to lay her eggs. In fact, I want to show you a really cool picture of what it looks like. This is a picture, I hope you can see that. This is a picture that has been, a female has filled up all of these little tubes, and you can see that it's mudded off there on the end. That means that tube, she's done with that, and it might have as many as 6 to 8 cocoons in there. So the female starts by collecting mud. So you might think, what does mud have to do with mason bees? But they need mud as part of the process that they go through. So it can help if you provide mud. So that sounds odd, but you can do this by you know, digging out a little square in your flower bed, and digging up the dirt, adding water, so it literally is mud. If you don't have a scenario like that, or maybe you're in a condo or something else, you can literally just have a tray and put mud in there, making sure that you're adding water frequently so it's not dry. Because what the female will do is collect mud and go into the back of these tubes. She'll go in that hole and go all the way to the back and put a wall of mud, and then collect pollen and nectar, put a big blob of that in there, and then she lays an egg on that, and then puts another wall of mud. And so there's a little cell there with a little egg to go through its life cycle within that its own little private bedroom. and then she repeats that process all the way out to the end, where then it is, as I show this picture, you'll know that that one's full because it's mudded off on the end. And so that female, all the while in the process of wanting to lay her eggs, she's pollinating all of the trees in your yard. So it's just this natural thing that works perfectly for all of us. So once the female has collected pollen and filled up all of those, she will be out and about in your yard for a while, but really only lives for about 6 weeks. It's for both of them, it's a short, the adult life cycle is very short. So she, at some point, just dies. You know, they just die out somewhere in your yard. But she has laid the eggs for the next generation. So those eggs will stay in there all the while, growing through their life cycle. We carry a really cool poster that, if you would like to have a real basic knowledge of how the mason bee cycle works, this is excellent, this little poster. It's not expensive, and it goes through spring, summer, fall, and winter, explaining the life cycle and how, you know, what to watch for and what you need to do. So after the female dies, the eggs are in their little spot, and they keep eating the food that she put in there for them, and they develop from the egg into a larva, and then a pupa, and then eventually by about the end of September, they are an actual adult mason bee in that little tube, and they are in a little cocoon. So a little mason bee in a cocoon, and then from that point, they simply hibernate through the fall and winter in their little cocoon. And then in the spring, those bees that female had started will emerge in the spring. So there's a whole new crop of mason bees. So each year you have new adults. They live their little short life, and then it cycles again all over. So it's really quite remarkable. The bees that you see flying around in the summer will be, you know, bumblebees, which is another native pollinator, or leafcutter bees. There's so many different kinds, and of course honeybees. And honeybees are not native to North America. I don't know if you knew that. They were brought over from Europe back in the late 1600s, I believe. So they're here. They've been here a long time, but they're not native, which I find really fascinating. We think of honeybees as very much a part of our continent. And so Anyway, so native pollinators are really helpful to our environment, and it's good for us to help them. Another thing that you can do that actually helps the mason bee is not use pesticides, because they are literally flying around in all of your trees and shrubs and coming in close contact, with those flowers. Pesticides are very dangerous and bad for any bee, any kind of bee. So I want to show you a picture. I've got some really great photos here, courtesy of Craig Kearns. Craig works here at the shop. I'm sure if you've been in here, you know Craig. We've got some great photos to share. This is one of his from his backyard, and this shows a mason bee on a flower right there. It's I believe that's some kind of a fruit tree. And if you were to see a mason bee let's say you're outside on a beautiful day and they're buzzing around, you might not even realize it. You might think it's a housefly because they're small, mostly black. In the right light, they can look kind of bluish or greenish black, but they don't look like when you think of a honeybee or a bumblebee. They don't look like that. If they buzzed past you, you might just think, oh, there's a fly. So this is a really beautiful picture of one. They have a black body. Well, they just like a housefly. There you go. Now, here's another interesting picture. Okay, this is another one of Craig Kearns' photos. And this is, he explained to me that he was standing literally like less than a foot away, and they didn't even mind because they're extremely, completely non-aggressive. Okay, so that's good to know. Mason bees are not aggressive. They are going about, that female is very busy. She has quite the to-do list. She's very busy collecting that nectar and pollen. She wants to lay that egg. So we're just sort of a nuisance to her. But she is not going to try to harm you. They're not aggressive at all. In fact, if you are a person that has extreme bee allergies, a mason bee is non-lethal. The male does not even have a stinger, okay? Doesn't even have one. A female does, but it's so unusual for them to use it, and if they did sting you, it just feels like a little itch or something. It's real minor, and they simply aren't interested. Yes, Molly.
Have mason bee populations been raising since people have been putting out bee boxes?
Okay, that was a good question. Someone asked, has the mason bee population increased since people have been putting out the bee boxes? And the answer, I don't know. I don't know. No one's ever asked me that before. Good question. I would think that it surely would be helpful, because as around cities and suburbia, as we develop more and more and more, it just destroys more habitat. And as people spray pesticides, that's detrimental to them as well. So now, as we have more of a resurgence of this wonderful thing to do to help nature, if more and more people do this and follow the steps, surely I would think it would be beneficial. I don't know if there's any kind of a study out there in the world of entomology. If someone is trying to do such counts, it would be difficult to collect that data. So I honestly don't know, but I want to believe the answer is yes. Okay. Was there another one?
No.
Okay. All right. So then I wanted to show you, let's see. Okay, I showed you that one and that one. Okay. So now, the other thing I wanted to tell you about is, okay, placement. This is a biggie. Placement of your house. If you buy a house, a bee house, keep in mind that mason bees are solitary. They're not like honeybees. They don't have a hive. They don't have a queen. They don't make honey. They're just a solitary female going about her business of laying eggs. So it's nothing, that you have to think in those terms. So when you place whichever house that you buy, you want it to be in a warm, sunny location. Typically, a fence post or a fence is not a good place, because there's too much air movement and breeziness around the house, which makes it cooler, which is not good for the bee. So the best idea, honestly, for placing your bee house is on the side of a building, your house, maybe the side of your garage, or a shed or greenhouse, some kind of a building where it can be secure, and in either east facing or southerly. And the reason is, after they've been cool all night, the sun can shine on their little house and warm them up. And the bees will become more active when they're warm. So they don't want to be cool. For example, don't have it facing north because the morning starts out so much cooler that by the time they warm up enough, it has reduced their time for buzzing about. So east or south, on the side of a building, and then about 5 feet high is nice, because then very often you can see it and you can monitor and watch what's going on. Or it could be higher too. If you can, try to protect it, have an area that's somewhat protected from rain. Most of these houses have some kind of a ledge that protrudes out to protect it from rain. But think about, where you're placing it in your yard. And question.
Someone asks, I purchased mason bees now in my fridge, waiting for temperatures to come up. Where should I release them?
Okay, so they wanted to know, this person said they have bought some mason bees and want to know when they could release them. So we're getting to that.
Where to release them?
Oh, where to release them. Okay. They wanted to know where to release them. So I did talk about temperatures. When it's been 55 degrees through the day for about three to 5 days in a row. So it's up to that temperature that they need. Where to release them? Okay, so if you have one of these houses, then that's one story. If you don't happen to have a little house and you're just releasing them out into the world, waiting for them to find their own niche, then that's different. But so depending on which little house, where to release them. Okay, so you want to release them around the house that you have. Let me show you an example. This is an especially good one, because here's your block of where the bees would be coming from after they've gone through that year cycle. And up here is a little space. I like to call it an attic because it's a perfect little spot for you to take those cocoons, or if they're in straws. So I don't know if you bought yours in a straw or loose, like little beans. If they're loose, then you can put them in here, or the straws, you can slide them up here. Do not take the bee cocoons and shove them into these holes. That's not what you're going to do. So you can put them loose in there, and then they actually chew their way out of their cocoon when the time is right, and only they know when that perfect moment is. And then they will emerge out, usually on a sunny day, and start flying about and doing their thing. Again, males first, then females. Okay, so if you don't have that little space, then it's it's a little bit trickier. You need to release them someplace that's near whatever the house is, so that then they will then come back to the house. So one thing you could do is, okay, let's see. Here's a really cool one that has, this is a predator guard, by the way, which I will talk about. If you didn't have any bees yet, if this was your first year, you could put them in here. They would come out that hole, and then when they once they've all emerged out, then you would put your straws in there. So we carry these. I don't know if you can see these too well on camera, but these are cardboard straws. Yes, Molly.
A few people are asking, do you need paper tubes to put in the holes of the house?
Okay, good question. People are asking, do you need paper tubes to put into the holes of the house? So the answer is yes and no. So it depends on which system you go with. Some of them come with a situation like this, where there's already cardboard tubes. Some of them have, some of them are made out of a plastic type material that come apart for cleaning. Some of them are designed in such a way that you can slide a white paper tube inside the cardboard tube. And that way the cardboard can be used for several years, and you just simply remove the white paper liner. So it's a little more complex depending on which type you go with and ultimately which house that you buy. They're all a little bit different. But if you already have one, I would suggest either stop in the shop or call and say, here's what I have, or maybe, you know what works great is take a picture of it with your phone and then come in and talk to us, and we can say, here's what you would need for that. We do carry both the paper liners and the cardboard straws to rebuy each year. And then we have all these different types that you can start with, you know, to begin your process if you haven't ever done it. Not sure if that answered the question. Yes?
One question from a few minutes ago was, do you need anything extra to attract mason bees to the yard?
Okay. This person wanted to know, do you need anything extra to attract mason bees to your yard? So that's a really good question. I want to tell you my personal experience many years ago, a couple decades back, when our store first started carrying mason bee products. I thought, you know, what the heck, I'll do this. This is a good thing. This will help nature. And so I bought a little house, knew nothing about it. I put it up on the side of my garage facing south and promptly forgot about it because I was busy working and raising kids, and you know, and then I went back and looked at it, and the whole thing was filled up. Every single hole was mudded off. And I hadn't bought any bee cocoons. And so clearly those bees just naturally were occurring in my neighborhood. This is a long time ago, so nobody was buying bees back then. And they found it and they filled it up. So if mason bees are naturally occurring in your neighborhood, then they're just there. But to answer your question, flowers and shrubs and trees that bloom in the spring. So those are the things that attract them, as well as the little house for them to go in, for the female to lay her eggs. And then I mentioned mud. They do need mud. Now, not potting soil. That won't work. It has to be regular dirt, regular mud from the earth, and not bark dust. So you can create that mud thing I talked about earlier. So mud, a house, blossoms, and not using pesticides. That's what you can do to attract them. It's just nature, really. Yeah. Another question?
Yes. If you put the cocoons loose in the attic, do the males still hatch first?
Yes. It's just they're just genetically, that's what they're going to do. They're going to come out, and they will, like I said earlier, fly around and get ready for the females, and then eventually they will come out as well.
I would repeat the question as well.
The question was, if you put the cocoons loose, like in the little attic, will the males still come out first? And the answer is yes. By the way, if further on that note, when you have a little house, if this is, you know, the second year that they're going, you know, for a full cycle, the female will, when she begins laying eggs way in the back, she always lays several females in the back of the tube and males to the front of the tube. Isn't that amazing that nature knows that this is important? So the males come out first, as intended, and then the females are safe in the back from possible predators, and so it all just dovetails perfectly. It's really quite amazing. Molly, another question?
Mm-hmm. So after it's been used, you need to replace the tubes each year?
Okay, so depending on, the person said, after it's been used, do you replace the tubes each year? Okay, so again, it depends on if you go with, let me show you an example. So this is a block of wood that's been cut out just the right size. It's being held together right now with rubber bands. But you can see when I pull this apart, see how they actually lift apart? So these can be cleaned, and you don't have to use tubes, this type. And we have a couple of different brands that come apart like that. But if you use the kind where it is, in fact, tubes, then there's a couple ways you can go. You can either replace cardboard tubes each year, or you can keep the cardboard in place and slide a white paper liner in and out as needed. Because you can imagine, if you think about this mud that's all the way out to the end, after 1 or 2 years, that would get, really clunky and dirty and stuff, and much harder for a female to get back in there to do, her progress. So yes, the answer is yes, you do replace them. Yes. Okay, another question.
Mm-hmm. A few people are asking, so the nights are still in the 30s, and when can we put the cocoons out? What temperature doesn't need to be all that?
Oh, okay, yes, our March has been interesting this year. It's still very cold. When I got up this morning at my house in Mount Lake Terrace, it was 24 degrees. My hummingbird feeders were frozen. And here the daffodils are about ready to bloom. So, good question. So, you've probably noticed, if you looked around your neighborhood or as you drive around on errands and things, that some of the trees are just starting to open up. Forsythia is starting to bloom. The flowering cherries, you're starting to see that pink haze a little bit. So we're getting closer. So the temperature for the day, as I mentioned earlier, once you get to a high of 55 degrees during the day, and it's like that for about 3 to 5 days in a row, that's your cue that it's time to release them. That's it. And that would also coincide when that temperature is evolving like that for things to start blooming. So it usually dovetails really nicely. Yes?
On the subject of that bamboo box, somebody asked, if I have a house that has bamboo tubes and removable blocks, would I line both?
Okay. I'm wondering, okay, so the person was asking about bamboo. I'm a little thrown off by your question. We don't actually have any bamboo tubes, but you're saying that you do. So, I'm not sure. I think the bamboo tubes have to be replaced every year. We don't carry them. We only do the cardboard and paper. And I think because the bamboo tubes are on the inside, they're very rough because they're a natural plant. I don't think that you can slide that white paper in there. So I think you simply have to replace those each year. I hope that answers your question.
I think maybe they also might be asking about if you line the blocks that you were showing before, if you line those or if you clean them out separately,
the wooden blocks?
Yeah.
Okay. Some of this stuff's a little complicated. So with these, you don't have to use straws with these wooden blocks because they come apart. You can literally take them apart and clean them. But then with the ones that have this thing, these you can pull out the tubes and replace them, or these are not terribly expensive. You can just buy a whole new one each year if you want to. Another question.
Speaking of the blocks, somebody asks, at what time of year do you clean the plastic blocks?
Okay, so that gets into a whole other thing. And interestingly, years ago, before we became so knowledgeable about all this, we simply had a wooden block that was drilled out with holes, with the correct size hole, and then if it got dirty, you just made a new one. But we've learned from the early years that mites can get into those tubes and create a lot of problems. And so there's a whole process that you go through, and then mentioned earlier, by the end of September, around about that time, you can take your house, whatever kind you have, and bring it in and put it safe and secure, like just pick the whole thing up and put it in the garage, for example, where it is safe from predators. Interestingly, woodpeckers will not eat the live adult bee, but there's a certain point in the process where they will take their long bill, and if the house is outside where they can get to it, and they'll go in there and eat what's in the little tubes. So one way to protect that is chicken wire. Just, your good old chicken wire, put it around that house with enough spacing so that the woodpecker can't reach their tongue in. But, okay, so that protects them in the summer months, but around about the end of September or October, you can take your little house off of the wall of your garage or wherever you have it and bring it in and just set it in the garage. And that way it's out of harm's way. All the bees, the female is completely done by that point. She has died, in fact, so it's just sitting there waiting to hibernate. So then they are. Okay, so they're done. Then what you can do in the winter, depending again on which kind you have, is take it apart and see how they look. If there is, and I have a good photo here to show. I don't know if you can see this all that well on camera, but this is a view of if there was no cover on top of the tubes, this is what it would look like. And so you can see that the little individual cells in each one of those is a cocoon. So what you can do in the winter, and again, depending on which one you have, is open up your liners or whatever and take them out and brush off the dirt, the mud, and which is dry at that point, and hold them in a container. Now, if you're going to take them all out of their house, then you would put them in a container in your fridge to just leave them there for the rest of the winter. This is after you've brushed them off and they're loose at this point. I think I also have a picture of that. Here is a picture of a whole bunch of loose cocoons that have been cleaned. And there's just dozens of them there that have been cleaned off, and this is how they would look, just a little loose. They're very lightweight, and then you can store them in a container in your fridge with some moisture nearby, like a little cup of water or a washcloth that's wet. You don't want them to get too dried out. So then you can store them in your refrigerator. Some people will leave them in the house and have it out again, like in your garage or a greenhouse or an outbuilding of some type. You don't want them in the house, it's too warm. They need to stay cooler through the winter months. And so the cleaning process makes them ready for the next year. If you leave them in the tubes and then set the house back out in March, then they will begin coming out, when the time is right, and emerging out into your yard. And then at that point, you can take out the old tubes and slide in the new ones. So we got a couple different stories there. Yes?
Is it too late in the season to purchase mason bees?
As of today? Okay, this person want to know, is it too late to purchase mason bees? And the answer is no. Again, because we've had a really cold spring, it wasn't that long ago we had all that snow. And now, like I was just saying, it's been so cold at night. The answer, no, it's not too late. We actually carry mason bee cocoons. We store them in the fridge, so they're still in their little hibernative state. But definitely not too late. Yes?
When somebody asked, when we start putting out cocoons, should we put a few out every couple of weeks or all at once?
Okay, this person wanted to know when they're putting out cocoons, should they put them out all at once or stagger them over weeks? So some people will do that based on something that's blooming in their yard. Maybe they have something that blooms a little bit later, and so they will hold some back and release them, at that point, so that the bees come out when that thing is blossoming. I suppose a person could do that, but if you kind of think about what happens in nature, and they are tied in to the cycles of what's happening in nature, I think sometimes that's the best. Let nature do what it naturally does, and that is when they'll know when the time is right. And so then you can put them out when we start hitting that temperature, and then they will emerge when they are ready, usually on a sunny day. So I would say release them all at once. But, you know, you can probably learn more in depth. Oh, by the way, I just want to mention, we have some excellent books. If you are the type of person that really wants to get in depth and learn more details, I'm just kind of skimming the surface here this evening. This is an excellent one right here. This is The Orchard Mason Bee by Brian Griffin. This originally came out in the 90s. This guy was like kind of like a pioneer in getting this whole hobby. Really, it's like a hobby for folks, getting it going. This is an excellent resource. We carry this book. And then here's another one, Pollination with Mason Bees. This is the second edition. This is also quite comprehensive, and it really helps you learn even more about this topic and in detail. And this is written by a woman who is an entomologist up in BC, Canada. So this is a really good one, along with that little chart that I showed you is super helpful. If you just want the cliff notes, then that little chart is really a great way to go. Okay, so did I answer that question, Molly?
Yes.
Okay.
There's a similar question that's a little bit different. If you want a later pollination date, can you manipulate that by releasing the cocoons later in May without harming the bees and their life cycle?
Okay, and that's pretty much what I just answered. Somebody wanted to know, can you manipulate the, releasing of those bees? So I pretty much just answered that. You technically could, keeping them at a very steady temperature in the refrigerator so that they're just in that, hibernative state. And then when you want them to come out, but obviously you can't bring them out way in the summer. That throws off their whole natural, way to be. But you could have them come out maybe a few weeks later. Yes.
Somebody's asking to spell the name of the landscaping shrub that you mentioned.
Oh dear. Okay, let's see. I have it written down here. Where is it? Give me a second. There's a common name, of course, but I was using, okay, so the first word's P as in Paul, P-I-E-R-I-S, that's the first word, and the second word, japonica, is J-A-P-O-N-I-C-A, Perry japonica. And they're wonderful landscaping shrubs. My neighbor has one that I just love because it's literally about 50 years old. It's so mature and very fragrant. Lots of bees like it, not just mason bees. That's a really good one to add to your yard. Any nursery would carry it. It's really a good one. Thanks for asking. Yes?
Somebody asked, so the house with the tubes is just for the spring?
Yes. All of these are just, okay, they wanted to know, the house with the tubes, is it just for spring? Let me make sure I answer that correctly. Mason bees are very much a spring bee. Everything that they do happens in the spring. So the house goes out in the spring, they emerge in the spring, and they refill in the spring. And then at the end of summer, you can take the house and put it in your garage. Not sure if that answered that the way you meant. Yes.
Let's see. Somebody says, if several queens hatch, do they all lay eggs in the same house?
Okay, good question. Somebody wanted to know, if several queens hatch, do they all lay eggs in the same house? So first of all, technically there are no queens. There's males and females, but no queen. It's not a hive. And yes, several different females can lay their eggs in the same house, and they, if a female, it's fascinating to watch. If a female starts going into a tube that she thinks is hers, and there might be a different female already in there, then she immediately backs out and realizes that she has the wrong one. But so one thing like this could have several different females laying eggs, and there was a study done back 2003 or 6, where they realized by close observation that a female will secrete a certain fluid when she goes into the tube, so it's a scent that she knows that one's hers. Isn't that fascinating? So they know that that's their tube, and other females don't recognize that scent, so they don't use that one. So yeah, there could be several. Another question.
What if we lose power in the winter and have them stored in the fridge? Will that hurt the bees?
Okay, that's a good question. Somebody wanted to know, what if they were storing their bees in the fridge and they lost power and the refrigerator was no longer cold? You know, the way it is now, it's rare for people to have the power out for a long time. So I would think for a day or two it'd be just fine. But if you know, you literally didn't have power for a week, you know, in your refrigerator, that would be dreadful. But I think at that point, if it's quite cold outside, I would take the mason bees and in their container that they're in and put them maybe, like, say, in the garage, or if you have a shed or a greenhouse, you know, something, so it's outside where it's cold. But as soon as your refrigerator gets back on, I would just put them back in there. Another question.
Could we or do we ship the bees? Like, ship them out?
Oh, I don't think so. That's tricky. If you live far away and you need some, what I would do, I would check with your local Wild Birds Unlimited or nurseries. Nurseries always carry mason bees. Check with them so you could drive to get them. You know, it'd be real tricky. It's not good to jostle them all around, and the heat, possible huge heat fluctuations. If they were in a UPS truck and it was really hot in there, they might be confused and start coming out of the tubes or whatever. So yeah, shipping is very tricky. We get them from very close local suppliers, so you know, there's not that big time of, you know, worrying about them being jostled around out there in FedEx land. Okay.
I think that's all the questions for now. So
Okay. All right, so let me double check. I want to look at my notes because there are several things I wanted to make sure that I mentioned. Let's see. Once you set up your nest, wherever you decide, let's say you've placed it on the side of your garage about 5 feet up facing south, so you're good to go. And then maybe something happens, maybe you decide you're going to paint your garage. You don't want to move that house once the process has begun and the females are pollinating. Don't move the house, because she will be confused and won't be able to find it, and then without her bringing in that nectar and pollen for the eggs, then they would just starve. So don't move the house. So that's important. You know, once it's there, it has to stay there until September. Let's see. I talked about that. Also, to increase the likelihood of their success of the mason bee, it really helps to have placed that house near things that are blooming. So let's say if you had a couple of fruit trees on the east side of your house, but you place the mason bee house facing south, you won't have as good a success as if you moved it over facing east. So that's something to think about. And also you can plant different things near the bee house so that when they emerge, they'll find blossoms. They're looking for that nectar and then gathering the pollen. So that will increase the success of the mason bees by having things blooming. So for example, in my yard, I had an apple tree that was there. And this is a cool story, I should tell you this. So the first year that the mason bees emerged, we had this kind of scraggly apple tree in our front yard that each year we had about 5 or 6 apples. And then that first year that all those mason bees emerged, we were astonished by how many little apples started growing on the tree because they'd pollinated. And so my daughter and I, it's one of my favorite memories, we took a big basket and went out and made a project of it out in the yard, and we counted and picked our apples. We had 112 apples. It was amazing. It went from almost none to this tree that was just hanging with apples. And it was a wonderful, it's one of my good memories. Thank you for listening. Okay, so let's see now. Okay, I think I've kind of covered all the basic stuff here that I wanted to talk to everybody about. But there's so many unique little tweaks and questions about it. So I hope that you will all, if you have time, come into the shop. I will tell you that besides myself, Craig is especially knowledgeable about mason bees. He can answer any question you have. And you can look at more photos that we have here in the shop. And it's a fascinating thing and such a good thing that we can all do to help not just our yards but nature in general. Here's another little tip. Some people have asked, well, how far afield do they go? Like if they've emerged from that little house and they don't find what they need. They tend to stay in a pretty close range because the time that the female spends going from a flower, gathering that pollen and nectar all the way back to her little house, that's really crucial because her lifespan is so short. So they don't go that far away, maybe as the size of a football field. You know, so they stick pretty close to where their eggs are so they can very quickly come back and complete that job before their life ends. So they stick pretty close. It's not like they're going to go 10 miles down the road somewhere else. So they're staying in your neighborhood. So anyway, so this is one of those good things that we can all do in nature. And with the ongoing, habitat loss and pesticides and development, this is a good thing that you can do to help. And again, I hope that you'll come into the shop and ask questions more specific to your needs and what it is you're wanting to do in your yard. Now, Molly, were there any more questions about mason bees?
I don't believe so.
Okay, so now what I'd like to do, as I promised I would, is touch on the topic of pine siskins. This was such a huge, huge thing in our region in January, February, and on into March. Many pieces were published on the internet and the Department of Wildlife and news broadcasts everywhere you look. There was something about pine siskins and salmonella. So here's what we're finding. A lot of the flocks have dispersed. Some folks are still reporting that they have pine siskins, and others say, gee, I haven't had any for months. Some of them, did die. They contracted the salmonella, and that was the end of their life cycle. And by the way, this is a cycle that repeats in nature. This is nothing new. This is something that happens in nature every time they have an eruptive year in population. So a certain percentage of pine siskins will die. But now, let's see, today's March 15th, is it? 16th. So in a couple of weeks, April, just around the corner, that's when so many of our species begin nesting. And these huge flocks that might have 200 pine siskins all flying around together looking for food, those are going to break up because that male and that female are going to come together as a couple for the nesting season. So finding a mate, building their nest, incubating, feeding their young, that whole thing takes this whole big long stretch of time. So Mother Nature is putting an end to this problem for us. And so a lot of people are coming in and saying, can I put my feeder up? When can I do it? So if you have not had any pine siskins now, and maybe you've taken your seed feeder down and just maybe you only have your hummingbird and suet feeder up, you're not seeing any pine siskins, certainly not any sick ones, make sure your feeder has been cleaned, fill it with some nice fresh seed, you can go ahead and put it up. Some of you might be waiting until April, because I know some reports have said wait till April. And so that's certainly your decision, but it's highly possible that it is safe at this point. Now, if you still had some pine siskins in your yard and you're concerned about that, then keep your seed feeder down until April, particularly if you're seeing any sick ones or ones that have died recently in your yard. Definitely keep that seed feeder, just keep it in the garage, whatever. Before you put it back out, make sure you've cleaned it. We have an excellent new handout in the shop. It's quite good, that we're happy to give to you if you need some more information about the pine siskins. It's written by a man who for years worked as an ornithology professor at a university and is now owns a Wild Birds Unlimited. So he has the unique perspective of knowing the biology side of things and the hobby side and how those things coincide. an excellent perspective, and we've got this great handout that we're happy to share with you. So I hope that answers your detailed questions about the pine siskins. And oh, Molly says we have one more last question.
One last question for the mason bees.
Okay, mason bees.
How many feet away from the flowers should the house be?
Oh, okay. This person wanted to know how many feet away from the house should the flowers be. Certainly, within 20 feet, just so the female isn't spending her whole day flying. And trees obviously aren't going to Oh, I should add this. Do not put a mason bee house in the fruit tree itself. Always put it on a building. Once the tree leaves out, it would be far too shady and cool for the bees, and they need to be warmer. So do not place a mason bee in a tree or on the fence. Just put it on a building. Yeah, so I'd say if you have some kind of something blooming, certainly within 10 or 20 feet is good. Well, I think that we've just answered an endless stream of mason bee questions. I hope that you all found that to be informative. And again, we have more in-depth information for you here and would love to answer your individual questions for your yard and your home. And I'd like to thank you all of you out there, once again, for joining us for these live events. We're having so much fun with them, and the comments that we're getting back from all of you are really positive. And so I think this is a good thing. It's a win-win. We're going to keep doing it every month. So be watching our emails and other things to see what the topic will be for April. And we'll do it again in the evening like this until otherwise changed. But thank you for everybody for joining us tonight, and we hope to see you next time around. Good night.